First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, particularly Professor Vallis, for inviting me to be here and have an opportunity to talk about frailty and its relationship to sarcopenia and come up with an operational assessment for frailty. So I always like to start off, and I'm not going to be able to read this from there, so I'm going to come down. So those of you at the back, I hope you see. I cannot see, I cannot pee, I cannot chew, I cannot screw. Oh my God, what can I do? My memory shrinks, my hearing stinks. No sense of smell. I look like hell. My mood is bad, can you tell? My body is drooping, have trouble pooping. The golden years have come at last. The golden years can kiss my whatever. So that's the future of aging. I can tell you that I think there's almost every one there, with one or two exceptions. The screw one is okay still, but the rest I'm struggling with. So it happens to all of us, and that's the beginning of frailty that you're looking at what Dr. Seuss is talking about. It gets worse. So as you can see on this slide, somewhere around about the age of 30, some of you in this audience haven't reached 30 yet. That's great, because you basically are still getting stronger. After 30, it's a downhill slope. It's about 1% per year, whatever you look at. If you do some exercise, you can slow that down a little bit. If you get a disease, it often goes down more quickly. And that's roughly what we're all looking at, and we have to find a way to slow that progression if we are going to allow many elder people to age in place. The original frailty, now frailty can divide itself into comorbidity, the Rockwood approach, or alternatively it can divide itself into the Freed approach, which is the physical phenotype. And what Linda Freed and her colleagues from Pittsburgh and Johns Hopkins show is that you can take people who are losing weight, who fundamentally are exhausted, who have some weakness shown by grip strength, walking speed at 15 feet, and low physical activity, and those people will go on rapidly to become more frail over time from a physical point of view. This is excluding cognitive frailty at the moment. And what she showed and her colleagues showed is that females tend to be slightly more frail than males, and that the percentage in the cardiovascular health study was 6.9%. So in the end of 2011, a group of societies, including INA, IAGG, EUGMS, AMDA, the SCWD, and AFAR, came together to say, can we come up with an acceptable way of looking at frailty? And I have to point out that in Greece, the Europeans had come together. They came up with an acceptable way of looking at it. But in the European way, and I'm not being horrible, they couldn't come to say, yes, we all agree. So the purpose of this was to say we were going to agree, and if we had to sit in a room for 6 days, we were going to agree. When people know that, they tend to stop arguing after a while, and it worked out very nicely. So we got people to agree, and the IAGG definition is basically that physical frailty is an important medical syndrome. The group defined physical frailty as a medical syndrome with multiple causes and contributors that is characterized by diminished strength, endurance, reduced physiological function, that increases an individual's vulnerability for developing increased dependency and or death. Carefully, we excluded cognitive frailty because we would still be there today arguing about that. Its time will come, and it is an important area. So IAGG, based on this, recommendations were that for the purposes of optimally managing individuals with physical frailty, all persons older than 70 years of age and all individuals with significant weight loss, 5% due to chronic disease, should be screened for frailty. This is asking every health professional, whenever they see someone, to screen for frailty, which means that you're going to need a rapid frail screen. There are many, many definitions of frailty out there. They all seem to work very well. Many of them overlap. They have good characteristics. They are really good. The problem with all of them is, with the exception of one, they take more than a few seconds to do. And if you're a busy family practitioner, GP, or a nurse looking after people, you don't have 10, 15 minutes to do these. You have to do it quickly. For that purpose, some time ago, Gabriel Van Allen and his colleagues at INA, as a group in Barcelona, that was a number of years ago with Bruno, we came together and we came up with what was a very simple approach to frailty, which was to say, if you look at someone and you say, are you fatigued? Do you have a problem with resistance? Can you climb a flight of stairs? Have you got aerobic problems? Can you walk a block? Are you ill? Do you have 5 or more illnesses? Or have you lost more than 5% of weight in 6 months? That this should predict frailty very simply. At this stage, there are 6 validations for this, 2 out of Australia, 1 by Jean Wu out of Hong Kong. We have 1 in a middle-aged population out of St. Louis, which it's an underprivileged population, but still suggests that somewhere around 50 you can start looking for frailty, even before the 70, and there are now 2 out of Europe. And I'll briefly go over these. This is the one of the first ones from Australia by Leon Flicker and his group, and it showed that basically your survival curves, frailty predicted ADL deficits. And this is really what you're trying to do with frailty. You want to predict that frail people will become disabled. Perhaps they'll also die quicker, but you want to try and stop people becoming disabled. This is a study done by Jean Wu in Hong Kong, and here basically she compared the different scales, and what she basically said is there was little difference between the frail, takes less than 15 seconds to do, and any of the others. This is our study looking at a 9-year follow-up in our middle-aged population, and again we took ADLs out. So this was one of the first times that people took ADLs out. Many of the frail studies in the literature actually include ADLs. Anybody who is disabled, with a few exceptions, a young male or female with paraplegia perhaps, is once you have disability, you are going to have frailty in the older population. So it's no use including ADLs, as if you've already got a deficit in ADLs, by definition, if you're 70, you're frail. And so taking those out, we found that the frail questionnaire could still predict worsening ADLs, worsening mortality, worsening hospitalization. This is a study from the European Male Aging Study from Fred Wu and his colleagues out of Manchester. And basically what they came up is saying the choice of frailty model may not be of paramount importance. They included the frail. It worked as well or as badly as all the others. So, you know, we recognize none of these are perfect. So it's a simple scale, but the more complex scales don't work any better. This is from the shared group, and basically, again, this Ken Rockwood's analysis, really little or no difference between any of the scales as far as predictability of the future is concerned. So I would suggest to you that the frail scale, which is basically very similar to what is in the Gerontopol scale, they have all the components of the frail scale. They are looking at other things as well, and certainly including cognition, I think when you screen to look at people is extremely important. So nevertheless, we have a simple, quick, validated scale that is now available. So the IAGG recommendations then went on to say physical frailty can potentially be prevented or treated with specific modalities such as exercise, protein calorie supplementation, vitamin D, and reduction of polypharmacy. So what is the major cause of frailty? And it's obviously sarcopenia, and this is a slide I showed from, it's stole from Alfonso, but it's just showing you that fundamentally how you cure frailty. You know, the old frail Spaniards, Europeans coming in, they're going to die, they swim, and they exercise, and they walk out the other side and they're young again. That's all you need to know about frailty. If you don't have an exercise program, you are not going to stop frailty. The concept of sarcopenia was first described by MacDonald Critchley, and he pointed out that muscle wasting starts in the periphery. We'll come back to that. Then Erwin Rosenberg, as you heard from Bruno, coined the term sarcopenia. It's important to recognize that sarcopenia looks like ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It is predominantly a neuronal disease, not a muscle disease, and that is a starting piece that we have to recognize. A number of studies now looking at motor unit numbers have shown that many people with sarcopenia have a predominant problem with their nerves. That's why the original wasting starts a long distance from the brain. very similar to diabetes. Your peripheral neuropathy starts a long way from the brain, and this here is using basically the C-terminal fragments, which pick up sarcopenia in people who've got neuronal problems, and you can see that group there, that a large subset of sarcopenic people have predominantly a neuronal problem, and there's a presentation later in the meeting from the Nuremberg group on this. And then, just to make the point, compared to cachexia, basically, there's a big difference in the histology. Cachexia is a pure muscle disease, mainly due to increased cytokines. Sarcopenia is a neuronal disease with multiple other things. We all, I think, know by now that if you lose weight, you lose muscle. And the more muscle you lose, the worse you do. What we always tend to forget, and which is hard to show, is that fundamentally, if we lose weight, we lose muscle power and strength much more than we lose muscle mass. When you put the weight back on, you put back on the muscle, you fail to put back on the muscle strength. And in the studies of Manini and Clark, they have shown very nicely that it is not loss of muscle, but it is loss of muscle strength or power that predicts poor outcomes. Very important. And we'll go on now and talk a little bit about this. This is from Yves Roland and Bruno Vellis' study published in JAMDA, which show very nicely that you can have lousy muscle mass, and if it's high functional muscle, it doesn't matter. If you've got low muscle mass or high muscle mass, it's how well the muscle functions that matters, not basically muscle mass. This is extraordinarily important as we go forward, because all the definitions so far talk about DEXA, talk about measuring muscle mass. It costs money to have a DEXA machine on every corner. Yes, in the United States there's a DEXA machine on every corner, but we spend 17% of our GNP on healthcare because we are stupid. Europeans, hopefully, the rest of the world won't be as stupid. They will look to do things in a way that is functional. And I think when you look functionality, you realize sarcopenia is okay, but really what's important is the loss of strength. The guard keratopenia, which is your loss of force, i.e. strength, dynapenia, the loss of power. These are the things that lead to frailty, and then frailty leads to disability. There are a number of definitions. Bruno showed you these quickly. Sarcopenia with limited mobility is the one from the FCWD, and as I first thought from that, I'm showing you that one. But they all say the same thing. They say that you've got to look at function along with basically looking at muscle loss. You also have to have a way to define it. And the definition that's out there at the moment includes, if you want to improve it, either improving the 6-minute walk or gait speed, because you need to be able to show that it is functionally useful for EMA or the FDA to approve drugs, and we need the pharmaceutical industry to be involved with drugs if we're going to get enough political push behind us. This is the validation that Ted Maelstrom and I did of the SCWD one. The similar validations have been done by Landy and people in Asia of the European one. There are a number of validations, but actually if you look at it carefully, they all say walking speed is important. Muscle, well, we've just got to use it as well. And here are the comparison of the definitions. They all look the same. JAMDA has just published this month the definition from the Asian group. No real differences in any of them. So when we look at sarcopenia as it stands, it's histologically different from cachexia with a different set of causes. It is a syndrome. Loss of muscle mass is insufficient. Definitions can have to include limited strength, either grip strength or mobility, and it needs to be accepted by the NIH and the American Geriatric Society for it to become a universal definition. So going on from there, people from the FDA wrote an editorial in JAMDA where they said the problem is sarcopenia is where osteoporosis was 20 years ago. I don't think they're quite right, but they said there were many parallels between the two, and they were suggesting we could move a lot quicker by coming to consensus and getting there. And we all know that people who have osteoporosis often have sarcopenia. The two go together, and so I was looking at osteoporosis, and realized that there's now good data saying for the cracks that you just take the questions. Forget about basically measuring BMD, because for most people that gives you the answer. And we're thinking, this is bone, which you can't see, we don't know what's going on with bone, can't we do the same thing with muscle? So we came up with this definition called SARC-F, which is strength, difficulty in lifting or carrying 10 pounds, assistance with walking, rising from a chair, climbing chairs, stairs, or falls, and we decided we should validate it. This is from our 9-year longitudinal validation in our African American middle-aged population. It validates for every single outcome, including hospitalization, mortality, functional impairment, ADL. To do the same thing in the Baltimore longitudinal study with Luigi Ferrucci, showing the same sort of thing. In the NHANES study, the same sort of thing, but this is cross-sectional now, not longitudinal. In Chengdu, Professor Barong Dong has validated the SARC-F, and Professor Wu in Hong Kong has shown that the SARC-F has very good specificity, does against all the different definitions, and fundamentally it is more predictive than the definitions of outcome. So again, you have a simple 15-second questionnaire that gives you the same answers as more complex approaches that cost more money. So, what do I want to conclude with? I want to conclude that it's no use making a diagnosis if you don't do anything. And frailty basically can be treated using the frail questionnaire. Because if somebody is frail, then they start off, are they fatigued? Do they have depression? Are they anemic? Do they have Addison's disease? B12 deficiency? Do they have sleep apnea? Sleep disturbance is a major cause of fatigue in older people. Go on from there, we've talked about basically sarcopenia, use the SARC-F to make that diagnosis, and then do resistance and balance exercises, vitamin D, and basically going on from there, protein, aerobic exercises and protein if you're aerobic problems. The illnesses are important because every time an old person gets ill, some specialist gives them another drug. As you add drug on drug on drug, you make people frail. Polypharmacy, physicians are a major cause of frailty. We have learned to treat hypertension until blood pressure is too low. We have learned to treat every disease excessively without thinking what that is doing or how the drugs interact. There's good data for frailty, starting with Maria Fiataroni and Bill Evans' study in Boston, that even in 90-year-olds, exercise together with protein improves outcome. Maria Fiataroni Singh and her husband in Sydney have shown taking people post-hip fracture and putting them on a resistance regimen where you have a coach coming into the house. For WHO, we have to get people to pay for exercise coaches, not for physical therapists, for a coach. So all of us are less important than having a resistance exercise coach going into the house twice a week. Makes a huge difference to the outcome as far as hip fracture is concerned. The treatment for sarcopenia is clearly resistance exercise. We all know if you put a young person to bed, they lose about 300 milligrams of muscle in 30 days. If you put a person my age to bed, we lose a kilogram in 10 days. And if you come into a hospital, you lose your kilogram in 3 days. We take people into a hospital, we put them in bed. Why would you put somebody in bed when they are sick? So that they can lose their muscle, they can get sicker, and it takes forever to rehabilitate. No one in hospital should ever be allowed not to get dressed in the morning and walk around. And they're doing this in the ICUs in the United States now. They get them up on the ventilator and walk them around on ventilators. We have to do that. It's also important from Bob's data to realize that protein supplement slows the muscle loss. And there are a ton of studies that show higher dietary protein will correlates with better muscle. High protein supplements improve hand grip strength. This is Dr. Killen and Lizette DeCruz's data, which he gave me a great slide, which I didn't put in, so I apologize to you now, which basically showed protein together with resistance exercise makes a difference. This is a study out of Japan showing the same sort of thing. So we have treatments for frailty and sarcopenia. The Protage group showed very clearly that when reviewing the literature, there is a place for a high essential amino acid protein supplementation for people who are frail and sarcopenic. And then finally, we have to remember people losing weight do very well with caloric supplements between meals, and there's also this mnemonic, which none of us can read, but basically this mnemonic's been around forever, and if you use that, you pick up the reversible causes of weight loss. So putting it all together, frailty is clearly something that is treatable. There is a consensus definition. We have a simple screening test and a simple one for sarcopenia, and they should be done by everyone. Until we expect that every healthcare professional screens for sarcopenia and frailty, we will not get anywhere. We can do this by bypassing the health profession and just putting it out on TV, putting it in the newspapers and stuff, and then the health professional will have to deal with it. As a geriatrician, much of my business comes because people come and see something on TV and come and ask me what to do about it. As a physician, I then have to learn what to do about it. It makes a big difference. Remember that this is treatable, and about 70% of frailty is due to sarcopenia. And if we do this, of course, we won't all look like this young German lady, but we will do much better than we've done before. So thank you all very much. Hopefully this is going to be a great meeting, and it will move frailty forward and sarcopenia. Thanks a lot.